Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle from WeAreSC.com. Usual suspects this week: Eric McKinney, Mark Culkin. I'm your guest host, Chris Arledge, and we're here to talk about all things USC football. Even if it's not fun, it will be fun. But even if it's not fun, we're going to talk about them. And I'm coming to you remotely from San Diego, where I'm here. I'm here for work, so I don't know whether the quality is going to be the same, but I know that I'm confused because the setup isn't the same. So I apologize for that. Okay, guys. Last week we were focused primarily on the quarterback change information, since that was huge news. We've now had an extra week to watch other college football games, not watching a USC game, to let it sink in a little bit more. And so I want to sort of hit the big picture topic. USC fans are obviously disappointed. I'm sure the USC players and coaches are even more disappointed with the course this season has taken. And so I guess I want to start with this. How much of the disappointing season that we've seen so far is due to a failure in Lincoln Riley's long-term plan for the program? Is that what this is? That Lincoln Riley came over from Oklahoma. He had a plan. The plan has failed, and here we are. Is that what's led to this? And if not, then we'll try to figure out what it might be. Who wants to start? Mark, you want to start? I can tell. What do you think?
So, I mean, ultimately, he's in charge. So if his long-term plan was to win the championship and get USC back to the top of the Pantheon, he's not navigating it really well so far through year three. I mean, like I said, ultimately he's in charge of the program. So how much responsibility is his, or how much of the failure is his? We're still in the process of determining that. I haven't seen him really adjust his game plan that much. I mean, give him credit. He did get rid of Alex Grinch. It took him a year too long, but that was one change. And that, I think, obviously affected recruiting as well when you held on to that defensive scheme for an extra year. So, I mean, his fingerprints are all over the cookie jar, so to speak, as far as, his failure, the long-term plan for the program. Has he handled the quarterback situation well? I guess, that's a big topic right now, right? Hindsight being 2020. Still not sure why he hasn't used Jade Mayava in certain situations throughout the course of the season. Why he didn't lean more into the run game this year when it was obviously working better than the passing game. Long term, I know he had 600 pages of notes on his iPad when he took over the program. I'm not sure how many notes he still has left. There was a lot of changes that had to be made. He's made a lot of changes. There's still more to be made. I'm just not sure how much we want to lay at his feet as long-term. This is where you failed so far. We can point to certain things this year. It doesn't look like it's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could all agree that as the head man, he gets paid the most. He's ultimately in charge, and the wins or losses are going to be his. But Eric, I'm wondering whether or not you agree with this. I think some people think that maybe Lincoln Riley came to USC with a plan, and maybe he's having to reassess that plan, and we can see that the first plan has failed. Do you think his first plan failed? And what happened?
Yes. I mean, the first plan was I'm going to bring Alex Grinch with me. I'm going to bring Benny Wiley with me. We are going to play this style of defense. We are going to do strength and conditioning and all of that this way. And 2 years in, he had to abandon all of that and go a completely different direction with that. And I know for Lincoln, offense is going to be number one. He talks about, I want to spend more time with the defense and more time doing this. There's offensive coaches and defensive coaches. He's an offensive coach. And so it's always going to feel like it's going to split at least 51-49. But his side of the ball now is having problems. But yeah, when you get here and you say this is who I'm bringing, these are the absolute key guys that I need with me and that are going to help me build this program. And 2 years in, one of them's gone, and one of them you've told, "Hey, we have to do it completely different now." Your initial sort of launch, you've had to completely revamp, completely reimagine. Now this one, what the program has done, and Lincoln, again, you talked about being the head coach, is always going to get the most blame, the most credit for things when it goes bad or goes well. I think the pivot has been fine this offseason and going that way on defense. This feels like a first year. This feels like the first year build. So again, if we're just saying you have to erase everything that happened the first 2 years and now here's where you are, yeah, there's almost no momentum from when he first got here and from that 2022 season where they were able to pile up wins. You're having to prove, starting right now, this is what the program is going to be. This is what we're going to do going forward. Yeah, so whatever you came here with, and I know he likes to talk about sort of behind the scenes, we're doing this, and we were really building kind of nutrition and strength and NIL and all of those things from the beginning. And if it does work out in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, that was all put in place back there. But no, the easily visible stuff of this is what we want to do, hit the ground running, and this is how we're doing it. No, that did not work, and now he's going to be graded on how can you pivot in all of those and start a new trajectory going forward.
So Eric, because Nebraska just did this, would you say he needs to hire an offensive coordinator, play caller, change the direction?
No, I think you need to shake some stuff up offensively. I know you've been pushing for a while about he needs a play caller, and that's fine. I'm sure in the offseason, that'll be one of the things that he goes over. Do I need to do that? Do I need to take a step back when he looks at it? What I really want him to do, you need, and I'm not saying you have to blow up the offensive side like you blew up the defensive side, but you really need to start from scratch and piece things back together. And if some of those things fit, right? If some of them it's no, it's still this still works, this still works, then that's fine. But you better be honest with yourself about if it really works or if you just like to do it or if it's comfortable or those things. I mean, you need a real sort of top to bottom, up and down on the offensive side because you're not rolling out of bed and throwing up 30 points anymore. And that's a low number for him, right? You used to trip and fall your way to 30 points as a Lincoln Riley offense, and now it's a struggle to hit mid 25s, 27, 28 against Big Ten defense. So yeah, you need a real sort of overhaul on that side. And I think that's probably, along with gripping tightly to what you what you have on defense and making sure that stays. But yeah, that look at the offensive side is going to be big for this offseason.
Yeah, Eric, you mentioned it feels like a first year, and it does. The crazy thing is if Lincoln Riley had realized what he had in Alex Grinch or what he didn't have in Alex Grinch before making the move, and if he had told USC, I'm only going to come if you give me X dollars to hire an elite defensive staff. And if he had done that on year one, the amount of credits he would have built up in his bank this year when his offense collapsed would have been sizable because he would have made the playoff in that first year. Frankly, with this year's defense, he probably would have made the playoff even last year. I mean, they were losing a lot of very close games to good teams because they couldn't stop anybody. And maybe he doesn't make the playoff. Maybe they have 2 losses last year after a playoff year the first year. That changes everything going into this year. It also means that you have a 2-year head start on rebuilding the defense. By the time you get to year 3, the defense may be in a position where it can really pick up for the offense's failings. This defense really can't. they're keeping the offense in games. They are. I mean, every week they're keeping the offense in games. I do believe that this defensive staff is getting quite a bit out of the talent they have and should be commended for turning around the culture of the thing. And but it's not a defense going to win you a game. They're not going to do that. They're not that good. They're good enough to get you some stops and keep the other team in the mid-20s, which on any other Lincoln Riley team from the beginning of time until this year means you beat everybody by 3 touchdowns, right? I mean, that's what it means. So yeah, it's clear that the initial plan failed. I think the initial plan also failed in terms of the personnel they could put together, but that may be related to other things. So I'm going to hit that with the next question. But the initial plan failed, and the problem you have now is that by the time he's getting around to fix what should have been fixed on day one, the one thing that you always thought you could trust with Lincoln Riley just so happens to be falling apart, and that makes things extraordinarily difficult. Nobody's ever seen a Lincoln Riley offense like this, right? It's not that they can't do anything, right? They're not the worst offense in the country. It's just that they're not particularly good. They're just okay. They're just okay. And if you're just okay on offense, and if you're just okay on defense, and if you're just okay on special teams, if you play a tough schedule, you're probably going to go 6-6, 7-5. I mean, that's right. That's what you're looking at. So, yeah, it's clear now that his initial plan did fail. The one thing that gives me pause is that while you say he's going to need to do a ground up overhaul of the offense, at least take a close look at everything to see whether there are things that need to be changed. It took Lincoln so long to do that with the defense. And that was a side of the ball that he is not as emotionally invested in and responsible for, and it didn't have his fingerprints all over it. Telling him to do that for his offense when almost since the day he was born, Lincoln Riley was being called an offensive genius, an offensive guru, and every offense he puts out there, they roll all over people. Man, that's going to be tough because that requires a gigantic shrinking of the ego. And we'll see whether he's capable of that. I mean, that would be hard for just about any coach. And I think this is a coach that has an especially difficult time admitting, yeah, I kind of screwed it all up there.
It's interesting you bring that up because I talked about that on my show that showed up this morning. Last year, Coach Riley actually had the conversation how he enjoys the uncomfortable conversation, where he has to kind of address the situation at hand, make the difficult choice. You're saying that he might not be able to do that. I tend to agree with you, but if he enjoys that uncomfortable conversation, why does he have to wait so long to be uncomfortable? He has 9 games to make a quarterback change.
I don't know what he enjoys. If he enjoys uncomfortable conversations, he should join us. I have lots of questions for him. It would be very uncomfortable. But I mean, I don't know why he thought Alex Grinch was the answer when he was at Oklahoma. But certainly at that Tulane game, I would have fired Alex Grinch before we got back to the locker room. Like, I wouldn't have let him in. I would have locked the door and told him to find an Uber to the airport. I mean, the idea that this is a coach who, I love the difficult conversation. I like the hard decision. I like to get in there and really figure things out. Well, okay. That's an easy thing to say. I don't know that we've seen that. I do think, though, that there are probably parts of Riley's plan or things that he expected he would be able to do that he hasn't been able to do that are probably a little bit outside his control. We should talk about some of those as well, because that's also had an impact why on year 3, Lincoln Riley does not have the roster that we thought he would have. I think that's pretty safe. He doesn't have the roster that Pete Carroll would have had in his 3rd year, right? I mean, we saw what Pete Carroll was able to do by his 3rd year, and he was putting teams on the field that were immensely talented, despite the fact that he took over a program that was in complete shambles. That's not really what we've seen from Riley. So are there some things going on here that were sort of outside of Lincoln Riley's control, or at the very least, things that he probably didn't expect when he signed up that also have put him in this predicament? Eric, why don't you go first on this one?
Yeah, I mean, NIL is the first one that's going to be way up there. And I don't know if he knew everything about USC's NIL situation before he took over, if he did know and thought it would change quickly, but being not just being behind, but being that far behind, and also being that far behind that many teams that you needed to go beat and play with and get guys from or keep away from, and all of that was a massive detriment. And then there was the having to build a roster, not from scratch, but pretty much from scratch, where how does this work? How does it work on transfers? Can you bring in guys and then they fit? Can you bring in guys that are chasing money? What does that do to the locker room? Like there were a lot of unanswered and difficult questions there on how those things would work out when you had to bring in so many players on both sides that both needed to start and play a lot and also be comfortable maybe being role players or backups. There was so much to balance there when he took over, and you're doing it on a budget that not a lot of other people have to work with. And so that I again, what he took over with the roster, specifically on the offensive line, not that first group, right? That first group you could play with, that 2022 group of seniors you could play with, but it also meant you don't have a ton of playing time to go offer people, hey, come in and start for us, because that wasn't really there. So if you want to try to build behind that, that was a tougher sell kind of everywhere. So you did not take over a roster that was set for years going forward along the offensive line, which that's always been when his offenses work well, you can point to the offensive line saying that thing's really going right there. And then you didn't have the money to chase everybody that you needed in the portal to be able to get all those guys. And those are, I mean, again, if you if you give me two things, give me a really good offensive line, and then let me go really work what free agency or what college football is now with free agency, and pick and choose guys that I want to add to this roster. And he didn't really have those. And again, like we mentioned, it didn't feel like the pivot to, hey, we don't have those, now what do we do? It was clunky or kind of not there or not successful, as we're seeing now.
Yeah. Mark, thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot more I can really add to that. Look, he inherited a cupboard that wasn't exactly stocked. And then when you don't have, when you think you have the NIL funds somewhere out there in the ether and they don't appear, I mean, that's the problem. USC has enough money to buy and sell everybody twice. But for whatever reason, in the initial NIL stages, USC they're afraid of their own shadow, and they weren't willing to, I don't know, play the same game that other programs are playing NIL. They weren't as aggressive as they should have been. And so that obviously hurt. You saw how it hurt them this past offseason. They weren't willing to go in and overpay, I guess is the term everybody's using right now. You're looking at the 2025 class, and if you're paying attention to the WeAreSC, recruiting guru Scott Schrader, he's saying that, this year, 2025 class, USC's all in with their NIL. They're willing to pay to keep it together. So we're going to see if that change in philosophy is rooted, and if they're going to, hold on to that and make it happen. But again, as far as what was out of his control, you have to look at what he inherited personnel-wise, what he had to work with, or he thought he might be able to work with, as far as the NIL to buy the players you need. And that's what college football is right now. It's not even about brand recognition anymore. If you have an open checkbook, you're going to be able to compete. Bottom line. I mean, Ole Miss, they don't have the same brand recognition as USC, but they've shown that they can go out during the offseason and buy the type of defense they need to do what they did to Georgia this past weekend. So that's what college football's turned into. The other thing that I think was out of Coach Riley's control, and maybe he can spend some of the money he's earning, is get a little bit more aggressive with the crappy officiating, earn a fine, pay for it. He could afford it.
Yeah, I mean, if we can buy and sell everybody twice over, we should buy some new officials, it seems to me. But yeah, I wonder what Lincoln Riley expected when he came to USC in terms of NIL and the like. I mean, it's not that it's when he took the job, everybody knew that NIL was a thing. I don't think many people understood exactly what it was going to become and how quickly it was going to become that. But they probably should have anticipated that. And I think there were programs that did, right? There were programs that were very aggressive from the outset in a way that USC wasn't willing to be, because they recognized now that players can have money, the people who find a way to get them money have a much better likelihood of landing those guys. And USC was afraid of, I don't know what. They were afraid of another Reggie Bush type situation. But the reality is that the NCAA wasn't enforcing the rules, and it's not just that the NCAA was essentially powerless, which was pretty obvious. But it's that there were programs that were completely flaunting the rules, like from the get-go. From the get-go, you have, every Texas offensive lineman is going to get, what, $50,000 or whatever the number was, $100,000. You hear that and you say, well, wait a minute, USC, you guys are playing a different game than everybody else. And I'd love to know what Lincoln Riley's discussions were with Heritage Hall, with donors, with others around that, because if you're a coach and you go to USC, what you assume is that you are going to be able to recruit the pick of the litter on the West Coast, because USC's always been able to do that. Even the lousy coaches at USC still would win most of their recruiting battles against the schools on the West Coast. They just would. And all of a sudden you find out that USC is now in the position that Utah had been in for the last 10 years, which is, it's actually tough to compete against people for recruits because you can't offer them what other people can offer them. And USC did not handle that well at all. That does not excuse the 4-5 record. USC has enough talent on this roster, even with the NIL deficiencies the last couple of years, that you should be beating teams like Maryland, right? I mean, we all know that. And but it certainly impacts your ability to compete with the people at the top. I mean, Oregon's won some recruiting battles against USC over the years, but even when USC was coached by buffoons, USC would win most of those recruiting battles for California kids. They would. Now they're losing just about all of them. And I don't know that that's because Dan Lanning is a genius. I think that it helps to be able to write gigantic checks. So that's something that I think Lincoln Riley didn't realize. That I think USC was very slow to figure out that they were playing 1980s. USC was playing like SEC from 1980, where they would cheat in terms of getting players some money, but just a little bit of money. You don't want to go overboard. Whereas everybody else is playing like it's a game show. They're just giving away $1 million checks, and it's tough to compete with the big dogs. Now, the funny thing is, you look at USC's roster this year and you say that is not a championship level roster, and it's not. We all know that. But strangely enough, it's a roster that allowed them to beat LSU and go to overtime with Penn State. And so it's also not a complete and utter disaster. There are some players on that team that can do some things. And so, it's not a 4-5 roster, but it's also not a 9-0 roster.
Well, is it a roster is there anybody on this roster right now that has the leverage to say, you know what, if you want me to come back next year, let's renegotiate my NIL contract right now. For instance, South Carolina is dealing with it with their freshman defensive end. That's the step behind USC's going to be going into next year. Great, you're going to sign these players. Now, are you going to retain them? Are you ready to play that game? I
mean, USC has some good young players, but USC doesn't have a dude like that. They don't. So, but they're still going to have those conversations, right? Because you do have players at USC that other teams would be interested in, and so they're going to have to pay up to keep them.
But they all could do that. They all could, right? You can pay for production, or you can pay for potential. And if you're a player, you kind of have leverage with both, right? Any of these 2023 recruits that signed with USC that have played a lot or not played a lot. We really like the 23 class, the 24 class. There's some guys in there.
Yeah.
Every other coach in the country would like those guys too, right? Depth or whatever. So virtually every player, every offseason has a chance to sort of reset their market and look. I mean, that's kind of the reality right now. And that's why one of the first things that gets brought up a lot with collectives and NIL and all that are contracts, right? Multi-year contracts and buyouts and keeping guys locked in and all of that stuff. But if that doesn't exist, yeah, a guy who caught 5 passes who feels underutilized and has connections with coaches that all recruited him as a high 4-star guy out of high school, yeah, they'll say, "Hey, we can use you." Right? I mean, and if someone out there is saying, "Hey, we can use you," then you can go back and say, "I've got options."
Yeah, and the thing is, if you're not paying top dollar so that you're recruiting good players, USC's recruited some very good players over the last couple of years. They have not been in the market for the elite prospects because the elite prospects get a lot more money somewhere else. And you say, well, so what? I mean, 5 stars don't matter, but individual players do in fact sometimes matter. Caleb Williams erased a bunch of losses for USC when he was here. If Caleb Williams was on this roster, USC would be undefeated this year right now. There's no question in my mind, because he's 14 points better than Miller Moss is. And that's not a shot at Miller Moss, who I still think is a pretty decent quarterback. It's just the difference between Miller Moss and Caleb Williams is night and day. The difference between Caleb Williams and almost every college quarterback is night and day. They're not losing those games with Caleb Williams. Reggie Bush erased a lot of losses at USC. He did some things that other people can't do, and all of a sudden you're winning a football game. So the problem is, past USC coaches, when the program was well run, they were in on those elite guys, top 10, 20 players, the guys who you look at and say, that guy's going to be a first-round draft choice in 3 years. Lincoln Riley's had a very difficult time recruiting those guys, and it's harder to win without them, because there are times when another team's going to be hanging around, and when you want to have a guy who you give the ball to because you know he'll win the game for you, USC this year doesn't have a guy like that. They have some really good football players on both sides of the ball. They have some skill position guys that I think are really talented. They don't have anybody who you say, that's Caleb, that's Reggie, that's a guy, he'll just make a play and win the game. They don't have that. But if you have Phil Knight's checkbook, you can get guys like that. That's a primary difference right now between USC and Oregon. Is Oregon, if you need a defensive tackle, Oregon went out and overpaid for defensive tackles. You know what? It's helped them. It's helped them. You watch Oregon games, you say, yeah, you know what? That guy would have helped us. It's true. So the NIL has made a huge difference, and that doesn't excuse 4 and 5. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. But USC doesn't have they don't have an Ohio State roster or an Oregon roster. But if Lincoln Riley had been playing with Dan Lanning's money or Ryan Day's money the last 2 years, they would have those things. They would. Well, okay. Well, let's do this. Let's talk about first the next 3 games, and then long term. What does USC need to do to right this ship? Is it writable? The problem is, every time USC starts to lose some games, you have everybody on the message boards and all your friends around the water cooler turn into Bill Plaschke and talk about a USC can't win anymore. And I want to know if that's true. I don't suspect it's true, but maybe there are some deficits that the program has that they're unlikely to overcome at this point. What do they need to do to right the ship over the next 3? Because 4 and 8 is a lot different than 7 and 5 with wins over UCLA and Notre Dame. And whatever they do over the next 3, you can only have so many 7-win seasons if you're Lincoln Riley and you're making $6 bazillion every single year at USC. I mean, you can only stack together so many 7-win seasons before everybody is in revolt. So, Mark, let's start with the short term. What does USC need to do to get things on track for the last 3 games? Please get things on track the last 3 games.
I think it's going to take a little cooperation with the play calling on offense. I mean, you got to lean into that running game. You got to use what you're good at. It would be nice if these final 3 regular season games, the sophomore wide receivers who aren't named Mekhi Lemon, can kind of get on track. offer their unique skill set. You talked about how they don't have a Reggie Bush, that playmaker. I mean, we thought that was what Zachariah Branch was supposed to be, right? That hasn't materialized in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's to the point where he's not even the kickoff returner anymore. It took a simple switch of saying, Mackay, go show Zachariah how to return a kick. And the last few times he's been back there, he's come close to breaking one, 50% of the time. It would be nice if the defense, while it's improved so much over last year, it looks so much more fundamentally sound. You could probably count on one hand how many sacks they have. I know they've got more than 5, but it would be nice to see the defense end with a flourish, get some sacks, especially from the defensive line. Look, they're going to have to show that they can play physical football against Nebraska and UCLA and Notre Dame. Deshaun Foster, he might not be much of a talker, but he's got his team playing hard for 60 minutes. And one thing he can say is, his team's got a 3-game winning streak. USC doesn't. And when you're at the end of the season, you don't want to be going into your rivalry game. Granted, it's 2 weeks away, but you don't want to be going into your rivalry game or games heading in the opposite direction of those two teams you're going to be playing. So, I want to see what Jaden is capable of as a starter at quarterback, not coming in with, less pressure, cleaning up the end of the Utah State game, whatever that situation may be. This team is going to figure out if they're going to be able to play with Jaden as their starting quarterback after these 3 games. Otherwise, going into the offseason, Lincoln's got a much bigger problem to deal with. So next 3 games, just show that you can play physical football, show that you care. And obviously you want to make a bowl game, so you got to win at least 2 of them.
Yeah. Eric, what do you think? Let's talk about the next 3. What can they do to get this back on track? Or is it fixable at this point?
So for this year, I mean, like you said, fixable from where a lot of people were at the beginning of the year, no. But you can end with, it sounds crazy based on what we've seen the last 5 games, but you can end with 3 games and feel good. Now, what can they do specifically in those games? Mark mentioned it. You can start running downhill at teams. And what I think you can do, and what I've sort of mentioned a few times this year, but embrace winning games 24-21. Be fine with that. Be comfortable in those games. Don't keep getting frustrated because we didn't hit a touchdown here and then get a turnover, then hit another touchdown, and we didn't stretch our lead to 24 in the second quarter. You don't have a team that can do that. They have not shown against anybody this year that they can do that. Be comfortable in a tight game in the third quarter and making the plays that you need to make, kicking the field goals, controlling the ball, keeping it, and punting. Not that I would ever suggest punting is winning, but you're getting enough defensive stops where if on offense you just finish your drives each time and be comfortable in those situations, you're going to be fine. USC's 8-1 this year if they score 30 points in every game. That, again, if you said that at the beginning of the year, sounds good. Sounds good. Which playoff seed are they? So again, it feels like this kind of push, like it's not happening. It's not happening. We're not blowing these teams out. Be comfortable with that. It's fine. If you go and beat Nebraska 27-24, 24-21, whatever it is, lean into that because we're seeing more and more in the Big Ten that you have to win those games because there's going to be far more of those than these, 58-24 laughers unless you get to play Purdue 6 times a year, which I don't see that on a future schedule.
Yeah. If you're Ohio State or Oregon, you're probably going to win a lot of your games by blowout. I mean, Lincoln Riley's frustration is that he now has a defense that's getting him some stops, and just about all of his past teams would have blown the doors off of those teams because when they had an opportunity, they took it. But look, Lincoln Riley is used to coaching with NFL starting quarterbacks. I mean, all of his quarterbacks were NFL starters, all of them. They still are. There's a difference. I mean, Jalen Hurts, it matters if you have Caleb Williams or Jalen Hurts in that position, because then you do have the Caleb Williams, the Reggie Bush, the guy that you can give the ball to and he'll make things happen. Because all those guys could. I mean, all four of them could. And without that, I mean, one interesting question is Lincoln Riley a fantastic developer of quarterbacks, or is he a great offensive coach? It's possible that there are a lot of coaches that can score a lot of points if you have those quarterbacks running the show. And so we'll see whether Lincoln Riley, I mean, hopefully we won't. Hopefully USC from this point on will just put first round draft choice NFL starters at quarterback every year. But the small sample size we have is, okay, if you don't give Lincoln Riley a first round pick and an NFL starter at quarterback, then his offenses don't actually look that great. Maybe it's not a scheme thing. Maybe he's just really good at developing quarterbacks. I don't know. But I know that I know you're in a position now where if Jaden Maiava plays really well, even if it's not Miller Moss's fault that they're 4-5, he contributed, but it's not all his fault. There are all kinds of problems on this team. But if Jaden Maiava plays really well and USC wins the next 3, it really does change the entire outlook of the program going into next year. Now all the talk is going to be about Lincoln Riley's found his next superstar quarterback, USC's on a roll, the defense has improved, and everything's positive. If Maiava doesn't play well, if they keep throwing away games, then I don't know what you have to sell, but you better have the NIL dollars lined up, because if you don't have anything to sell, you better have a check you can buy. And that works for a lot of programs. It hasn't worked for USC yet, but maybe this offseason. Long term, I'll give my 2 cents and you guys can weigh in. Long term, USC has to find a way to solve their talent problem, number one. They have to. Because USC doesn't have a championship roster and they need to. Lincoln Riley didn't come to USC to win 8 games. USC doesn't pay him 8 figures a year to win 8 games, right? It doesn't make any sense. They have to find a way to solve that problem. I think I like what their recruiting class looks like if they hold on to it. I still don't know that you're recruiting like Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, and Alabama right now. I don't think you are. They need to find a solution to that, because if they don't find a solution to that, it almost doesn't matter. You can be a good team and you can win a lot of games, but if you want to be an elite program, you have to have an elite roster filled with future high NFL draft choices. Pete Carroll didn't win championships without high NFL draft choices. Neither did Nick Saban. Neither did Urban Meyer. Nobody does. That's what you have to have. And USC doesn't have that yet. I mean, that's their fundamental problem. You give Lincoln Riley an immensely talented offense, he's going to score a lot of points. I know that already. D'Anton Lynn, if he has an immensely talented defense, he will stop people. I know that already. They don't have that yet. So, guys, how are they going to fix that problem? Is it just NIL? Is it just begging USC alums to give more money? I mean, what is the answer to that dilemma? Because that's the big problem facing the program, I think.
I think so. The end of the year, and you mentioned it, you got to find out if Jaden Maiava is your quarterback next year, because this quarterback portal could be crazy if you really need a starter for next year. You could end up spending a lot of money this year, because if it's the last portal before revenue sharing and before everyone's kind of on the same page, this is the last one where maybe guys know, hey, this is my shot. This is my big shot to move and get everything that I can get in this portal season. So if you can find out that Jaden Maiava is the guy, and I think you're giving yourself more of a shot, right? Potentially 3/4 games with him rather than with Miller. You had the 1 game. And again, we saw, looking back at it now, yeah, there were signs in there that we've seen a lot of what we've seen from him here. He hit some open guys. There were some misses, and you heard people that kind of watch film in the offseason saying like the numbers weren't as good as, or sorry, the tape wasn't as good as the numbers. we all kind of went in saying, hey, there's something there. You can win with this guy. He'll be fine. And he's played sort of on that edge for the year. So anyway, you get more of a look at Jade Mayava. I think Lincoln Riley can go into the offseason knowing more about that position. Do you have a guy, or do you really need to dive in and get it? Now that's one spot, but a key spot. I think the talent coming up, right? The 23 class, the 24 class, if you can keep those guys and keep them going through the program, because what you've seen in one off season, this past off season, where this is now the pivot on nutrition, strength and conditioning, like that was not a lie when we sat out there in from in spring ball and also the start of fall camp and said these guys look for real. Like they are looking more and more like a team that can compete with these other teams. It's the first year, and a lot of the most impressive guys were true freshmen or second year guys. So as they keep going through, I think you're going to see that talent kind of continue to bubble up. This year, what'd you need? You needed your 2020 class, 2021 class to like lead the way. That's what Indiana has become such a talking point. That is Michigan from last year. That is a senior heavy dominant team with guys that have played a ton of football. USC's 2021 class, I can go down the list from the top. Stop me when you hear a guy who's really contributing heavily to this team. Corey Foreman, Jackson Dart, Sierra Wright, Rajon Davis, Julian Simon, Michael Trigg, Prophet Brown, Jay Tawaya, Kalen Bullock. Miller Moss comes in there. Jalen Smith is right behind him. Be nice to have those guys above them listed in there. I mean, you've got, Michael Jackson III is in there. Zamarian Gordon is in there. Joseph Manjack. Like that class just has not given this team what it's needed. There's a whole conversation. Could you fill it through the portal with other guys? All of that. Yes, that's a fair talking point. But I think getting guys in the program for years and years, and now next year that 2023 class becomes more impactful, the 24 class becomes more impactful. And then Mark mentioned it earlier, if you're going to go in on some potentially kind of instant impact, more competitive guys in that 25 class, I think that's a solid way to go. You're still going to need to fill holes, but I think in the portal, you've seen, I think maybe defensively, especially, you can fill a hole with a Gavin Meyer, right? If the guys around him, if you get a big giant jump from Jade Abasiri and Elijah Hughes and Devin Tompkins and guys like that, you can fill holes around them and be competitive. Lincoln Riley, early on, this is the least talented roster we'll ever have at USC. Again, another conversation you can have for wherever. If this defensive staff stays together, I think maybe you can say that about this group, and they're getting it done with this group. So I think there's a lot of faith on that side of the ball that they're going to figure it out. The sophomore receivers, as they kind of get together, more experience, all of that. The offensive line, you sunk a lot into a few guys on the offensive line here. If they can take a step forward, I think you're competitive going forward. I don't think there's a ton of panic. Oh, they can't play with any of those teams, because I think what the playoff has done, what the portal has done, all of that is now there is this kind of gigantic middle class from like 7 to 20 or 22 in the rankings that could all sort of get into the playoff. And I don't know if you're 1, 2, or 3, which we've talked about. Those are probably the teams that win the whole thing. But I do think that you've got enough pieces to get into that mix.
Mark?
What was the question, Chris?
Well, I think the question was, how do they fix the talent deficit? If they want to be an elite program, they need an elite roster. They don't have an elite roster. What do they need to do to make that happen? Can they make that happen?
So you're looking at the 2025 recruiting class. They're hitting the spots they need to hit. we've been talking about it throughout the show, and I'm just going to keep it brief. You need to pay for it. Bottom line, you want the best players, pay for them. If you're not willing to pay, you're not going to get them. Even if they grew up in your backyard and USC was their dream school, it's their dream school until somebody writes a bigger check. I mean, all those kids at Mater Dei and at Bosco, whether or not they're good enough to be on USC's roster, that's beside the point. They're not coming to USC because USC isn't writing the check that is big enough for them to be at USC. Bottom line.
Yeah,
So
there are positions you have to pay for, right? I mean,
you have to pay for them.
USC has to have a pass rusher next year. They have to. And maybe Cameron Fountain will turn into a stud pass rusher by next year. I mean, he's a talented kid. He's got the sort of frame and athleticism you'd want, but I don't know. I know that you have to get a guy like that. You cannot continue to play defense with a group that cannot get pressure with forever. You just can't. You can't do it.
Is Braylon Shelby a miss? I mean, are we declaring him a miss now?
I don't know what to make of that. I mean, look, if you ask me the most disappointing positions on the team right now, I would tell you wide receiver, because the four sophomores have not lived up to their billing yet. Immensely talented, all of those guys, and you're getting consistent production out of one over the last couple of weeks, and the other guys just flash every once in a while. And that's all you ever see. That's a problem. I don't know what the problem is, but I would take a very close look at what's going on with that position group right now. And I would say the other one is your edge guys. The edge guy, we thought coming into the season, you look at the edge guys, and you think there's some real talent here. You've got Anthony Lucas, who is immensely talented, Braylon Shelby and Cameron Fountain, and you're talking about these edge guys. And some of those guys actually played pretty well against the run. I'll give them that. I think they have. But is there not a pass rusher in the group? Braylon Shelby is not a threat to rush the passer in his second year of the program. Why is that? I don't know. I'm not asserting that anything has to be done with position coaches or anything like that. I'm also not asserting it doesn't. I'm just saying those position groups have not panned out at all. And that's disappointing. The offensive line, we knew the offensive line might struggle. Thought they'd played better than they did early in the year, but you didn't look at that group and say, oh, incredible talent up there. You didn't say that. Your interior defensive guys, other than Bear Alexander, you didn't say, oh, there's incredible talent up there. But you're saying it at wide receiver, you're saying it at edge, and man, what do you have to show for it? You have groups that look like looks like what Northwestern would trot out on the field in terms of their production. So, it may be you just have to pay for some guys. You have to go pay for a pass rusher or two. You may have to pay for a left tackle.
I think you need three, right? You need a pass rusher. You need if you love Elijah Page at left, that's fine, but you need a right. It's the same two spots we talked about last portal season, right? You need a guy here, you need a guy there. But I think an edge rusher, a tackle, and maybe a corner based on kind of who you're losing and the depth there.
Yeah. And really, I think all those positions are places you can plug somebody in easily enough. Defense is easy. You can plug guys in on defense. It's not like plugging offensive linemen in. Left tackle may be a little more difficult, but I'm not convinced it is. And Elijah Page may be the left tackle of the future. I think he's got a promising future. I don't know if he's a left tackle or a right tackle, but you can plug in a left tackle and stick them with the other homegrown guys and be okay. But I think they're going to have to go out and pay for some elite talent. And if they're not able to do that or willing to do that, then you're probably looking at a real limit on what they're capable of doing even next year. And now you're talking about year 4. If you can't do it by year 4, you're never going to do it, I think. But okay, so what changes do you expect to see the bye week? Obviously, a new quarterback, but what else? What they've had a whole off week to figure out what in the world is going wrong. What are they going to fix? Please tell me they're going to fix something, Mark Culkin.
So maybe we see another change that just hasn't been publicized yet. It hasn't received the attention it deserves. Lincoln Riley is changing the quarterback. Do you think he makes a change at the offensive line, specifically at right tackle? I mean, Mason Murphy has struggled throughout the year. I would say probably more than any of the other starting offensive linemen. Maybe that's something that changes. I think we're going to see more play action, more quarterback reads with using Jaden's strength, which is his ability to extend plays. We've talked about it enough. Lean into the run game. And, are you going to use Mayava's arm? You're going to take some deep shots. You're going to test that secondary that Nebraska is bringing. Again, you got 3 games left. Coach Riley said he's not going to be making a whole lot of changes to the offense. At this point, can Jaden Mayava run the offense efficiently? Can he bounce back from having a bad throw or throwing an interception and making that his only mistake of the game? Those are the types of things I think we're hoping to see change after a bye week. Is the team more cohesive? We'll find out. I don't know.
Eric, what are we going to see?
I'd be surprised if there's a ton of personnel changes. The offensive line would be interesting, but outside of flipping Amos Talalele in for, I think he started the Wisconsin game, just kind of a decision because Lonnie Noah played in there. They've started the same offensive line every single game, and that doesn't happen a whole lot. Like usually if you get that kind of injury luck up there, things look pretty good and you feel really good about it. So they've gotten that luck and still not been able to do a ton with it. But a home game, they've played better there rather than on the road. I'd be surprised if there's a ton of personnel changes. Lincoln Riley talks about, this quarterback change is not about 2025 or the future. This is about winning these last 3 games. It would be talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth to say that and then play a bunch of freshmen or make a ton of changes like everywhere else. But I think the offense will feel different just because Jaden Mayava is a different quarterback. And Lincoln Riley said after the change, they have similar skill sets. And I don't know. I don't know how he watches them clearly more than we do in practice and all of that. Jaden Mayava lets you do different things, but the offense last year looks different than the offense this year. So does it look more like last year? Do they keep doing this year? I'll tell you what, if Jaden Mayava sits in the pocket and throws 48 passes against Nebraska, they're gonna run into issues. They're gonna run into issues moving the ball down the field there. So in that regard, yes, I expect things to look different because I don't expect, or at least hope, that that's not what we see from Jaden Mayava. The one thing I think we'll see, I think he's going to make a play. And again, this is not saying Miller Moss made no plays the whole year. He made some big time throws there, but we saw Mayava, right? The scramble against Utah State, I think, and again, that's Utah State, but getting out of trouble, rolling around, scoring a touchdown there. Like I think he's got a physical big time play like that in him that wasn't being made just with a quarterback's legs this year.
The reason that you can make a change of quarterback is because you have a guy behind the starter who is a legitimate big time prospect, right? I mean, this is a guy who played really well as a true freshman and has tremendous physical gifts. He's big, he's fast, he has a strong arm. If they had an incredible physical talent backing up right tackle, he probably would have played by now. They don't. They have, Tobias Ryman is probably going to be a good player, but he's not ready yet. He's just not. And so it's hard to make personnel choices or changes when you don't necessarily have somebody behind the guy that's going to be a superstar for you. I think some guys will continue to get more reps. I think you're probably going to see more of Sam Green and Elijah Hughes. Probably see more. You may see more Desmond Stevens, although at linebacker they tend to play those same guys a ton. But there's only so much you can do with the roster. There isn't a ton of top shelf talent on the roster. So you do what you can. They need to find a way to run the ball. I think they'll run the ball better with Jaden Mayava in there, in large part because Mayava can run the ball. And unless you have Peyton Manning, I don't know that you can get away these days with a pure drop back guy. I mean, we've all seen. Oh, how long have all of us been complaining that USC can't stop a mobile quarterback? Right? You hear it all the time from the fans, and it's true. You know why that's true? You know why that was true even in Pete Carroll's era, where everybody's talking about how, well, we have trouble with mobile quarterbacks. You know why? Everybody has trouble with mobile quarterbacks. Everybody. There's no good defense to it. So if you have a guy that can get out and make plays with his feet, he needs to be playing. And unless it's, if it's Peyton Manning and he can read the defense unbelievably well, always find the open guy, always put it in the right spot. Okay. But if you don't have that, you probably need a guy who can move around. And I would hope that going forward, recruiting wise, that's something that that USC does more effectively. I mean, it used to be that Alabama would put slow pocket quarterbacks on the field and it win national championships. And then Nick Saban decided, you know what, this doesn't win anymore, and he started to go out and find guys who can run around and make plays. And that's what everybody's doing now if they can. So I don't know what's going to be different. I suspect that they'll run the ball a little bit more. I hope they'll run the ball a little bit more. I never know what to expect on that. Every time you think that Riley's going to run the ball, he decides not to because it's 2nd and 6, and that's apparently a passing down. But it is what it is. All right, guys, let's end it with this. Got Nebraska coming up. There's no Tom Osborne. There's no Tommy Frazier. It's this year's Nebraska team, which means they're okay, but they're just okay. That's all they are. It's an okay team playing on the road. What's going to happen? What does USC need to do? Will they do it? What's the final score? Mark?
So Nebraska has the ability to kind of implode on themselves with penalties and doing stupid things. They're not really good in anything in particular on offense either. Their passing game is there. Their running game is kind of there. There was the comparisons of Dylan Raiola to Patrick Mahomes. I think those have been subsided a little bit. I mean, they did start the season 5-1. They looked like they had a chance to beat Ohio State, and then they didn't. USC fans kind of knows what it feels like to have a game kind of taken away from you with a bad call. The other thing with Nebraska right now is they don't score. 14 points, I think, is what they're averaging over their last 4 games or so. They're not that good on offense. So what did they do? Their head coach put his ego aside, went out and got Dana Holgorsen, who is maybe he's not on the same path as Lincoln Riley when it comes to being an offensive savant, but he's a good offensive play caller. He likes to play up tempo. He'll do some things that are going to confuse USC's defense. I got USC winning at home. I mean, they're an 8.5-point favorite. I'll go US because they're at home. USC 30, Nebraska 22.
Eric?
The winning team 27, the losing team 25. I'm gonna wait until Friday to figure out who I want to stick on this. But it's good. I mean, it's an average team, or a team that's played average sort of on both sides and struggled and imploded a little bit. Which team? Which team is that?
Yeah.
I think Nebraska making this change, it feels desperate and it feels like a real hit on Satterfield, the former offense coordinator, at just how bad he was. And I think going into the season, Nebraska fans were like, this is going to be bad. He's going to be bad. And then have been proven right by that because they cannot score. But Nebraska hasn't really giving up rushing yards unless Ethan Garber takes off on a 50-something yard run. So again, maybe that's what Jaden Mayava can give him. I think that USC will play better. I'm curious about the spark that Mayava gives USC, if it is one. I know, we've talked about the issues Miller Moss has had throwing kind of crippling, back-breaking picks. There's no question that he had the locker room and that guys were very supportive of him being the quarterback. I think it probably takes one 50-yard pass in the air to a wide receiver completed from Maava for everybody to light up and here we go. Or like we mentioned, some running play where he makes three guys miss and goes. I don't know if USC can just say, okay, here we go. We're not going to have that horrible interception or the misread or whatever. I think that's still very much on the table until he proves it isn't. So it's really hard for me to sit here and say they're gonna absolutely take off and go on a tear with him, or this is going to be catastrophic, because I think both things are still very much possible from him at quarterback and from this team. So I think it's another tight game, and I think USC's got to figure out how to make the plays to beat a Nebraska team that doesn't give up many running yards. I mean, I think they're top 10, top 15 in the country against the run. So just kind of flipping that switch and saying run against them might be difficult too.
Yeah, it's hard to say anything other than it's likely to be a very close game because I mean, we're calling Nebraska a mediocre team, an average team, which they are, but USC also is a very average team. And so, you get two average teams together, you're probably going to have some average stuff ensue. And that means you're probably looking at 24, 25, 26 points each. USC plays better at home than they do on the road. That's been the case all year. Most teams do. USC is not alone in that. And so I think the Trojans probably have the edge, and they do have the wild card that if Maava does some special things with his feet, that could really change the offense and make things easier. Because other than that, everything offensively has been hard all year. It's just grind all year long. So maybe he can change that. Nebraska doesn't score many points, but neither did Washington, neither did Maryland. There are lots of teams USC plays don't score many points, but they'll score 20 something against USC, and that's enough to win. So it'll be a good game. I don't know how many times we've said it this year that this is kind of a must-win game. This is kind of a must-win game, not because if you win the next three, you have a good season. 7-5 still isn't a good season, but just because the difference between 7-5 and whatever else you could end up with is pretty enormous. You can't afford to lose this one to be 4-6 going into those two rivalry games, especially with the UCLA team that's playing better and a Notre Dame team that, while the schedule's a joke, and it is a joke, every single week they're blowing people out. And that's a team that's been getting better as the year's gone on. So you can't afford to lose this one. USC is capable of losing it. I think they win because they're at home. I think they win. I think they will get us. I think they will get a spark from Maia, because I think he's going to do some things with his legs and maybe throw the ball downfield a little better than Miller did. But that may just be wishful thinking. I'm wrong almost every week when I pick USC games. So whatever, I'll be wrong again. If I'm going to be wrong anyway, let's go wrong big. 60-10 Trojans. Okay, fellas, anything to tell people before we sign off?
Same thing. WeAreSC right now, $1 for 7 days. If you get there now, you can see our coverage of the USC Nebraska game, and then that rolls into 50% off for an annual subscription.
Yeah, join us in 2 days or 3 days, whenever Eric gets around to putting it up for the Arledge's 10 questions. We had a week off. These guys got to rest up. They had a bye week also. Now they should come back strong. Okay, well, we're done then. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Until then, fight on.